And now I can say good afternoon, everyone. We are going to conclude our program for the day. And with Alberto Pena Rodriguez, who is with us via Zoom, and who will be speaking briefly about an extraordinary work that he published in the year 2020, which is a history of Portuguese-American newspapers since 1878. It is an extraordinary work of research, of extraordinary sources that he found that no one else had ever been able to locate, about all of the Portuguese newspapers ever published in the United States since 1878. Curiously enough, the oldest newspaper was published in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is an extraordinary story of a Portuguese community in Erie, Pennsylvania, a Zorian community. And so he is coming to us from Spain. He's a professor of media studies at the University of Vigo. He has published extensively on media, on the history of newspapers, on the history of media and political power. And so it is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us, Alberto. And Alberto will speak about News on the American Dream, a history of the Portuguese press in the United States. Welcome, Alberto.
Olá, muito bom dia. Muito obrigado pela apresentação, Frank. Grande abraço virtual e cumprimentos cordiais para todos. Vou falar em inglês porque preparei um texto junto com uma apresentação em PowerPoint em inglês e, portanto, vou ler esse texto, não é, que está adaptado ao tempo limite que me deu o professor Frank, não é, que são 15 minutos exatamente, ok? Portanto, vou agora partilhar o PowerPoint, ver se consigo para que se veja bem. Agora estão a ver o PowerPoint? Ok. Pronto, como já introduziu o professor Frank, pronto, isto é uma obra à volta da imprensa portuguesa nos Estados Unidos. Well, it is a pleasure and an honor to participate in this exciting event. I would especially like to thank the kind invitation of Professor Frank Sousa and the Saab Center at UMass Lowell to launch my book here today. As director of the Center of Portuguese Studies and Culture at UMass Dartmouth, Frank was a great and decisive support on that my research on the Portuguese-American Press. In fact, he is the author of the books forward. Likewise, I would like to acknowledge Taugus Press and its executive director, Mario Pereira, along with the translator, Serena Rivera, the Ferreira Mendes Portuguese-American Archives at UMass Dartmouth, and its former director, Professor Gloria de Sá, who was also editor of the Portuguese-American series of Taugus Press, where the work is published. News on the American Dream, a history of the Portuguese press in the United States, aims to shed light on the newspaper published by and for Portuguese immigrants and their descendants in the United States, covering a collection of 167 Portuguese-American newspapers and magazines, most of them founded during the 20s and 30s in the past century, as you can watch in the slide. This work tried to approach to the history of the Portuguese diaspora in the United States through the journalistic discourse of the Luso-American community. Narrated through these publications are thousands of diverse histories that reveal a set of personal and collective dreams regarding the experience of the Portuguese in the United States. Many of these periodicals were ephemeral, and the majority are forever lost. Nevertheless, fortunately, the newspaper collections in the Ferreira Mendes Portuguese-American Archives, promoted by Professor Frank Sousa, and in the Freitas Library of the Portuguese Fraternal Society of America in San Leandro, California, have preserved some examples of this kind of press. These collections allow to know the idiosyncrasy and the imaginary of the Portuguese in the United States, why they thought about themselves and their role as immigrants, how they saw Portugal from a distance, how they kept their traditions alive through cultural events, or how they related to other ethnic groups and to the dominant local culture. In particular, these publications provide us with an opportunity to understand symbolically how the Portuguese built their own American dream. It is important to point out that the American ethnic press is a phenomenon of the immigrant communities established in the United States. those immigrants originating from different parts of the world created a truly unique journalistic ecosystem, producing written communication media in dozens of different languages. One of the key tasks of the ethnic press has been historically to educate immigrants in their different roles as American citizens, but also providing information about their countries of origin and promoting events in the colony or political views. As immigrants raise new families with descendants schooled in English, the increase of readers in the local language translated into many ethnic newspapers offering contents in both languages. Since the onset, the ethnic press tried to find a market niche complementary to that of the American local press. To understand the real dimension of Portuguese journalism in the context of the American ethnic press, it is necessary to analyze quantitative data. Statistics published by different authors provide revealing information to comprehend the evolution of the non-English language press in the United States. Around 1910, there were more than 1,300 non-English language newspapers published in 30 different languages. About 500 titles were in German, 75 in Spanish, and 12 in Portuguese. The phenomenon of this Portuguese language press in the United States is obviously related to the evolution of migratory flows. The appearance or disappearance of newspapers founded by Portuguese settlers there depended on the arrival of new immigrants and the economic social changes affecting the Portuguese American community. Domestic migration within the American territory also affected newspapers, accounting for new headquarters or even new names. In a mosaic of population centers, the first newspapers in Portuguese appeared by the end of the 19th century. It is believed that the Portuguese language ethnic press in the United States emerged in 1877 with the foundation of the weekly newspaper Jornal de Noticias in Erie, Pennsylvania, as Franz Sousa pointed out. It marked the beginning of a new era in Portuguese American history. From then on, Portugal became news in America, and Portuguese Americans became producers of information, creating their own means of social communication and public self-representation. The Jornal de Noticias was edited during 6 years by the typographer João Maria Vicente, who soon, Antonio Maria Vicente, took the newspaper business to San Francisco, where he moved to establish the weekly newspapers of Progresso Californiense and A União Portuguesa. In California, the first newspaper was A Voz Portuguesa in 1880, and in Massachusetts, A Civilização, 1 year later. Between 1818 and 1930, there was a massive surge of Portuguese immigrants in the United States force, as you know. That's why the edition of newspapers in Portuguese extended to several states, especially Massachusetts, California, and Hawaii, which were the main destinations of Portuguese immigrants by the end of the 19th century. In Hawaii, they published up to 12 newspapers, including Aurora Hawaiana, A União Lusitana Hawaiana, O Popular, or O Fashion. The latter was the last newspaper published in Portuguese in Hawaii, disappeared in 1977. The population dispersion of Portuguese immigrants led to the progressive appearance of new newspapers in the states of Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Florida, Connecticut, and Virginia. Although many were short-lived, 5 of them lasted longer than half a century. The cities concentrating the largest number of periodicals were New Bedford, the epicenter of Portuguese immigration in New England, with 40, Auckland with 16, Newark with 13, Fall River with 12, and New York with 11. The Luso American Press has historically served to promote the Portuguese language and culture while developing a role as an instrument of civic education. It also promoted and supported social cohesion, political consensus, and associative projects. Through its press, the Portuguese American community succeeded in creating a public opinion expressed in its sound voice that resisted the dominant mainstream discourse in English. The dissemination and duration of some of these newspapers, as well as the dialogue they maintain with their readers, show that the immigrant press contributed significantly both to the development of a sense of belonging among the group and increased their visibility within the American social context, by promoting Portuguese traditions and culture and reporting on associative or fraternal organizations' activities, commercial life, political campaigns, festive celebrations, community agenda, and events sharing a common social cultural imaginary. They also commented on American life, labor or legal matters, made recommendations on community life, helped learning English and Portuguese, touched to look for work and offer ideas to start new businesses, among other contents. Most of the Portuguese immigrant editors were of Azorian origin and believed that their vocation of public service towards their countrymen was implicit in their entrepreneurial initiative. Some of these newspaper publishers would go on to create highly successful radio programs for the 30s onwards. One of them was the director of a Colonia Portuguesa, Arthur Vieira Ávila, who together with his wife Celeste Santos from Ponte de Lima, Portugal, produced in California several successful radio programs like Castelos Romanticus, as well as the pioneering specialized radio publications Rosa and Albert magazine and O Clarim. Another journalist who achieved great popularity as a radio broadcaster in the Portuguese-American community was, as Pedro Bicudo pointed out, Afonso Ferreira Mendes, who edited O Heraldo Português, a free advertising newspaper, for more than half a century, and which is the best showcase to observe the evolution of the commercial activity of the Portuguese in New England. Both the editors and the readers needed the spiritual encouragement provided by the headline in Portuguese, which could mean an effective bond that gave social cohesion to the community and became a symbol of patriotic affirmation. Some editors thus faced their profession as a mission and a public good. The weekly newspaper A Luta, founded in 1936 in New York City by the prior Joseph Casella, highlighted the role of the Portuguese-American press in the personal and collective development, describing it as the soul of the colony. So these newspapers had a special symbolic significance that made them a public reference with a strong emotional implication for the Portuguese community. In fact, to a greater or lesser extent, they helped affirm shared cultural values and the eagerness to progress economically and socially without losing touch with their national origins. Like other immigrant periodicals, many of the newspapers published by the Portuguese in the United States during the first half of the 20th century were short-lived and produced in an almost artisanal fashion. The readership was limited, commercials were sporadic, and the subsidies through institutional advertising from the Portuguese or American governments were scarce. Despite these limitations, some titles had a great influence over the immigrant community, such as the Diario de Noticias from New Bedford, edited during more than 45 years, whose circulation on many occasions exceeded 10,000 daily copies. However, every newspaper or magazine represents a landmark in the Portuguese-American history. Every periodical tells us a story of struggle, dignity, and commitment, starring by the Portuguese citizens who chose heroically to publish a periodical to survive, but also for the purpose of serving their ethnic community. As it was referred, in its beginnings, Portuguese newspapers were often published by immigrants with previous typographical experience who were of journalistic routines and professional news writing. However, many editors took up the challenge of self-learning the trade, turning their small businesses into profitable communication companies, such as the aforementioned Diario de Noticias and the current ones, Luz Americano of Newark, the Portuguese Time of New Bedford, and O Jornal de Fall River. Throughout their history, some titles competed strongly for readership and influence within the Portuguese community. Among all of them, possibly the two most significant newspapers, both for their duration and for their quality of their contents, were the Diario de Noticias and the Jornal Portugués of Oakland, California. While the first was liberal and sometimes opposed to the Portuguese dictatorship, the second was conservative and campaigned in favor of the cooperative regime of the Estado Novo, new state. After the establishment of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar's dictatorship in 1933, through pressure from their consular agents and the embassy, the Portuguese government tried to influence the editorial line of the most important newspapers in order to legitimize itself among the immigrants. During the period of the Spanish Civil War to the Second World War, the Secretariat of National Propaganda pressured some media to prevent the campaigns of the former Republican Minister of Education, João Camoesas, in newspapers such as O Colonial or Diário de Notícias. It is not easy to measure the real impact of those periodicals on the Portuguese immigrants. Nonetheless, considering the length and wide dissemination of some newspapers, probably the readers were certainly receptive to their informative and instructive value. Such an influence is clear in the case of the Diário de Notícias, which replaced the daily Alvorada in 1927. 1927, sorry. Both titles were founded by the same businessman, Guillermo Machado Luis, who originated from Terceira Island, Azores, and went to the United States as a young man without knowing how to read and write. Amazing. Directed from the 40s by João Rodrigues Rocha, the Diário de Notícias published abundant and varied articles on the Portuguese-American community, with a clear and patent defense of the Portuguese language and traditions. Its commitment with the Portuguese culture in the United States led the popular Portuguese-American poet Josefina do Canto e Castro to describe the reading of this periodical as, with quotations, brotherly embrace. In a certain way, Diário de Notícias played the role of a protector and beacon of the Portuguese language and culture in the United States. But despite this, in 1966, as it struggled for revival, it appealed to the patriotic sense of the Portuguese, publishing advertisements with the following message, open quotations. If you are Portuguese and want the Diário de Notícias to endure, get us new subscribers, close quotations. Finally, the historical flagship of the Portuguese-American Press in New England closed in 1973. To conclude, the continual migration of readers to digital media is making the profitability of print newspapers increasingly difficult, especially those with small audiences. In the internet era, immigrants have various sources of free information through networks that reduce the prominence and the relevance of traditional media. The great cyber showcase and the phenomenon of digital applications has created a virtual universe that presents great challenges to the survival of the paper-based press, forcing it to adapt to this new disruptive environment. Faced with these challenges, Portuguese-American newspapers have adapted in a variety of ways. In general, coverage regarding activities of the community increased as news from Portugal decreased, since digital and television media already provided extensive information on continental Portugal and the islands. The future of the Portuguese press in the United States will therefore depend on its ability to remain a useful source of information for immigrants in this new communication context in which achieving the American dream by publishing newspaper is becoming more and more difficult. But fortunately, the dream of continuing to create Portuguese American media and journalism goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto, so much thank you particularly for the great book that you wrote. I can only hope that you'll move on to a book on the history of Portuguese-American radio. This could be the next project. In fact, he's already published an extensive article on that subject, and hopefully that will eventually lead to a book. But Alberto, thank you so much for being with us today. It was great having you with us. And so we conclude today's events. I want to thank everyone who participated here today, and let me just mention the names very quickly. Paulo Tencourt, António Cardoso, Dimas Espínola, Natália Melo, Jorge Coelho Oliveira, and Maria Lourdes Serpa, e do Brasil, eu não disse António Cardoso, esqueci de dizer António Cardoso, Muito obrigado a todos pela vossa participação. Obrigado ao Pedro por estar aqui conosco. Eu acho que merece uma salva de palmas. Thank you, Greg, the organizer of the event.
Thank you to the audience.
Thank you to the audience. Thank you to every one of you. And one last word, which is Natalia has been at the Center for Portuguese Saab Center for 8 years. And much 8 years. Extraordinary. The idea of running the center without Natalia is almost inconceivable. Because Natalia does, she goes beyond the call of duty daily in support of the center. In support of this event, we could not have the amount of work that Natalia did to make this event here possible. The fact that she knew almost everyone in this room, that she had the connections to make it happen. So I'm so grateful for the 8 years that Natalia has contributed to the Saab Center for Portuguese Studies, and she is now moving on. She'll be working a full-time job. This is just a part-time position. She has received an offer and has accepted a full-time position. So I wish her well. I'm already dreading the day that is her last day, which is coming up a week from Monday. So, muito obrigado, Natalia. So it's been great having you here at the Center for 8 years. I can't even imagine how we're going to move forward. But you know, we'll have to survive one way or another. But thank you so much, Natalia. Archivist who's always ready for wonderful materials. So everyone in this room, everyone online with us, please think of materials for the Portuguese American Digital Archive. Because this is how Alberto was able to write a book. He was able to write a book because somebody kept the newspapers. They kept documents related to the newspapers. So after we're long gone from here, after immigration, of course, we've had 40 years of almost no immigration, what will remain is what is in these archives. This is how people will be able to reconstruct the Portuguese-American experience. The importance, the relevance of archives as we age, as we pass along, because that is the natural order of things. So I'm so grateful for the work that she's been with us for a little over a year. It's extraordinary. Please go visit the Portuguese American Digital Archive, and you'll be amazed at the work that is being done by Nikki and the work being done by Greg, who's the director of the archive. So this is aqui hoje. E convido-vos a almoçar connosco. Temos aqui comida aqui logo à saída da porta. Só por favor, temos comida que dá para, sei lá, para um batalhão. Então, espero que fiquem connosco, que almocem, que partilhem uns com os outros. E muito obrigado a todos vós por estar aqui connosco esta tarde.
Obrigado, Frank. O almoço fica para outro dia.
Muito obrigado a todos que nos seguem pela internet virtualmente.
Foi um prazer e uma honra. Foi um prazer e uma honra. Obrigado. Obrigado. Um grande abraço.